remember as a teenager, every day when I went home, I would hesitate as I put my key in the lock, and I'd just freeze, just holding it there, like just waiting. And I can remember the anxiety and the fear, because I never knew that once I turned that lock, what was going to be going on inside.
Welcome to the Becoming Sound podcast, where we dive into the tough stuff and try to find the humor in the hot mess of being an adult child. Join me as we peel back the layers on growing up in dysfunction, navigating substance abuse, mental health challenges, and everything in between. Hello. Thanks for joining me today on the Becoming Sound podcast. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Krista Zoft, your host, and I'm so glad you joined me today. I have a great guest today. Her name is Natasha Leahy from the UK, and Natasha is a late identified autistic therapist who knows firsthand what it's like to navigate life through a neurodivergent lens. She is also a somatic trauma therapist, an EFT practitioner, and breathwork coach. She works with trauma survivors and with late identified autistic adults, helping them reconnect with their authentic selves and understand their autistic identity and experiences. Natasha also supports parents raising neurodivergent children, offering a compassionate approach that blends the mind, body, and nervous system. So let's get started. Hi, Natasha. Welcome to Becoming Sound podcast. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Excited to be here talking with you.
Well, I'm glad to have you. Tell my audience a little bit about your personal journey and what kind of work you're doing in the world right now.
Okay. Well, it's such a big question, isn't it, about your personal journey? It's like, where do you start? So, my upbringing wasn't easy. Fairly dysfunctional family, domestic abuse growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to say that I don't have contact with my family
Okay.
of origin. And that was a conscious choice for my own healing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's this thing that you think that when you grow up and you leave home, that you leave it behind. You leave the abuse behind. And obviously at the time growing up, I didn't know it was abuse. I just knew it didn't feel right. I
Mm-hmm.
knew that within my bones that it was wrong, what was happening. But I didn't ever tell anyone what was happening. There was just a lot of chaos and unpredictability, never knowing what was going to happen. I remember as a teenager, every day when I went home, I would hesitate as I put my key in the lock, and I'd just freeze, just holding it there, like just waiting. And I can remember the anxiety and the fear, because I never knew that once I turned that lock, what was going to be going on inside. But it's just your reality, and you just get on with it, and you hide it, even though like no one ever said. Like, I know some people have the experience where their parents sort of like swear them to secrecy about what was happening at home, but my parents, I never remember my parents ever doing that. They never said to not tell people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you just knew that not to share. And I think, when you become a teenager and you start going around other people's houses and you're seeing them and dad and how they are, you kind of go,
You're like, what the hell?
yeah, like, oh, so how's a family staying screaming shut and call each other names all the time? Wow, this is like, oh, their parents are actually nice to them. Oh, wow. So yeah, my dad, I wouldn't describe him as like an alcoholic. Did he drink? Yes, he did. And it was most nights. But, my dad was a real grafter. He was always going out to work, come from a working class family. My dad's Irish, so obviously part of the culture as well. But he was just so unpredictable. And he was very verbally abusive. So every day there was verbal assaults. His favourite for me was always calling me stupid and ugly. And that was daily. So you can imagine that I grew up with not having very high esteem of my abilities or how I was in the world. And that had a massive, massive impact on me and my relationships. I didn't do very well at school because there was this massive fear of trying and failing. So I never tried, because you can only really fail if you don't put the effort in. Because like if you put the effort in and then you don't do very well, it's like, oh yeah, no, he's right, I am stupid. So I couldn't risk that. And I also think there was other things going on for me at the time, but obviously I didn't know at the time. I only know now, but so there was multiple reasons why I haven't got like the usual sort of developmental trajectory. Yeah, I definitely didn't follow the life script of like get a good education, get married, have children, get a house. That's never been my life. But I always knew I didn't want to be like them. I just didn't want to be like them. I never wanted my kids to live with that. I never wanted my kids to feel the way that I felt growing up, like so alone and not wanting to live, because I didn't for a long time. And I just, yeah, so I ended up having my daughter quite young. I was 21, I'm a single parent. And like I said, I left school, I didn't really have many qualifications, I did really badly. So the type of work I did was like, I did waitressing, and then I did factory work. And then when I had my daughter, I knew I couldn't like raise her as a single parent and work. I know a lot of people do, and I'm great for them, but I knew that I would be like gone from the house 12 hours a day. I'd never see her, and all my money, which wasn't a lot of money, was going to be going on childcare. So um, I became a recipient of state benefits and stayed at home and looked after my daughter. But I was determined that I wanted to make the best of that time. So when she was coming up for 3 years old, I decided to return to college because I wanted to see what I was capable of, because my dad had always told me I was stupid. I'd always felt like I was stupid. Everybody else had always treated me quite unkindly, and I just never seemed to understand things that other people understood. And I always felt like I was out of the loop, and that everybody else had like a guidebook to life that I'd not been given. So I wanted to go back to college to find out what I was capable of, because I met my really good friend, Stuart, and he was the first person in my life that had ever told me that I wasn't stupid. He was the first person who told me that you're clever. You're just as clever as my friends. And he had friends that had PhDs and stuff, and I was just, I think you're lying, but it was the first time that anyone had like said anything like that to me, and it made me go, oh, okay, well, I'll go back to college and see what I can do. And I wanted to do philosophy originally, but I wasn't able to do that because there was only like 4 people that wanted to do it, so they were like not going to run it for 4 of us. The other talk that I really liked was sociology. I was like, wow, I'd never come across it before, and I was like, wow, this is super interesting. So I decided to go to study sociology on Access, and I can remember I didn't think about it. I was just like, I'm just doing it. I'm going to do it. I want to do philosophy. I'm going. I think I'm a philosopher. Because I'd watched this program and I'd realised that I thought the same as these old dead white dudes. I was like, I'm actually a philosopher. That's what I am. That's what I'm going to do. And I just decided that I was going to go. I went to college. I didn't really think about it. Wasn't till the day I was there, and then they started talking about all the assignments we were going to have to do. And I thought, oh no, I didn't think about that. I just literally, like, I was thinking end goal, not like the process, I suppose. And it was an amazing journey, and I did really well. Awesome. So I ended up getting like top marks in my GCSEs. I ended up coming out, after the 2 years, I came out with a distinction. And then I went to the University of Leicester and studied sociology. And that was amazing. I just loved university. Yeah, I realised I'd been told all my life that I was stupid, and I felt I couldn't learn. And like, I realised that no, I'm not. I absolutely love learning. This is, I just needed to find the thing. And I'd found it in sociology.
Was that like a big moment for you for realizing how your childhood may have impacted you?
Yeah, I think it was just then My parents had a lot to say about me going to uni. They were like trying to put me off it because, I was raising my daughter on my own at the time. They were like, going to cost a lot of money. It was all barriers, barriers, barriers for them. And, I should just go and do a computer course or something and go and get a job at Thomas Cook doing data processing. But I was just like, no, I ain't listening to you. And other people weren't very supportive of me going to uni either, but I didn't listen to anyone. I just did it. I was just like,
Good
yeah,
for
I don't
you.
care what you say. I don't care what you say. I don't care. I'm going to do it. I want to do it. I always called my degree my anti-idiot certificate because it was like, after that, I knew he was wrong. I came out and I got first class honours, so I like knew he was so wrong about me and that he didn't have that power anymore. He'd try and call me stupid, but there's no way I'd ever believe him again. I went on and I did a master's degree in social research because I really wanted to be a sociologist. And then I went on to do a PhD at Warwick University. But 2 years in, I ended up having to leave because my whole life just kind of like fell apart bit by bit. It was a really horrendous time for me, what at the time I believed was a mental breakdown. My anxiety became so bad. I'd actually started to see a counsellor. This is the irony of it. I went to see a counsellor and they made things worse. And I'd always stayed away from counselling because my dad's so anti any psychological intervention. And when you have that drummed into you, that's weakness and, so you're weak, and people meddling about in your brain and stuff. And you really internalize that. So I stayed away from it. And also at the same time, I was like, yeah, I can't see a counsellor because if I start telling them all the stuff that's in here and bringing it out, oh my God, they're going to think, they're probably going to section me, because I always felt like there was something wrong with me, that I was broken because I just didn't seem to be able to cope with life in the way that other people could. As much as you have these thoughts about your family and I never talked to anybody about it. It was just and I can just remember coming out of her office and all my feelings were we was talking and then suddenly she was like, oh yeah, right, time's up. See you next week. And I was like, what? Oh my God, I got all these feelings. And I walked out of her office and I had a massive panic attack. I hadn't had a panic attack for years. I mean, I had them. But I ended up having the first one in about 4, 5 years. It'd been a while. It just got worse and worse to the point I couldn't leave the house. I became
When it's like opening Pandora's box, and then you don't have anyone there to guide you or help you
no, no,
process
no,
that. Too much, too fast.
But what that did for me, well, not at the time, obviously, because it was horrendous, and I had probably a really bad decade. I ended up leaving my PhD because my mental health was so bad. I couldn't leave the house. I was just too anxious. Feelings of not being good enough were there. My whole life collapsed basically. And when I left my PhD, I lost everything. I lost me. I lost because I'd constructed my whole self around it. It was the first time in my life I'd ever wanted anything. So, and I was just so ashamed of myself. Or
How did you get out of that?
slowly.
Mm-hmm.
The shame was there for so long. I couldn't talk about it for years. No one ever talked. Nobody ever mentioned my PhD to me, and I never mentioned it to anyone else. It was became this big dirty secret. The way that they kind of frame things is that how much of a disappointment I had been previously, and how much being not very successful was a reflection on them and their parenting. That they could then commandeer my successes as theirs. And I think that's the thing when you grow up in a dysfunctional family, that the boundaries are either not there or they're seriously blurred. That there is no you and them. It's kind of all enmeshed. You don't know that as a child, and when you've also got one of your parents saying to you that they're entitled to do what they like because they're your mother, and you're like, huh?
Till you get older and you realize, something's
Yeah,
wrong here.
yeah, absolutely. Like I said, the drive was always for my daughter at the time, for her to have a better life. I didn't want to repeat the generational cycle. I wanted her to be free of that. Became very passionate about parent-child sort of disciplinary dynamics. That was
Uh-huh.
my thing. And I think that came out of being a single parent. I became really like quite interested in sort of parent-child disciplinary dynamics from a sociological perspective. That's how
Uh-huh.
I came into it from like a children's rights perspective.
Uh-huh.
That was always my kind of thing. I always took the like, about the rights of children. And I think that's connected to the fact that what I went through as a child, that no one was there for me and my rights weren't protected. So I felt that I wanted to be that change for my daughter, but also for other people. I studied, my master's thesis was on parent-child disciplinary dynamics, and then my PhD was on that as well.
Were you able to make the connection then between your own upbringing and how the dysfunction and the narrative was
Yeah,
completely off
yes.
kilter?
Yeah, because children shouldn't be living in fear, and that fear it's not a way to control children. I don't really believe in controlling children. Like my philosophy as a parent, and then also having my son. My son is autistic and well, he's multiply neurodivergent, so he's autistic, and he also has a PDA profile. So I'm not sure if you have heard of PDA.
No, can you explain? And can you also explain a little bit about neurodivergence, just so my audience understands?
Yeah, so yeah, I think most people have heard of autism. I think a lot of people have misconceptions about autism still, and I think that's because of the way that it is medicalized and how it's presented in like the DSM-5 in America and how it is in the ICD-10 and 11 in Europe and the rest of the world. So it's seen as having deficits in social communication and interaction, restricted and repetitive behaviours. And these are all seen as, being abnormal and like failures and developmental delays, and how our way of being in the world is not seen as right, it's seen as abnormal,
Mm-hmm.
and it isn't true. So that's kind of what in the autistic community we refer to as the pathology paradigm of understanding autism, how we are as autistic people, how we're disabled by the cultures that we're in because it's seen as pathology rather than difference. So our way of being is no better or worse than the neuromajority. This is a different way of being. We have different
Mm-hmm.
communication style. We have different neurology. We have a different nervous system reactions. So it's at best it's neutral. To be
Mm-hmm.
autistic is, it's not a tragedy. Um, it's neutral.
How does this shape the work that you do with families?
Oh yes, so I do employed work as a family support worker with one of the UK's leading children's charities in my local area, working in the they're called family hubs.
Mm-hmm.
So when my son went to school and while I was trying to push for him to to be seen and to have assessments, and I started my work there. And in a lot of ways, I see that this place really like saved me because it was the first time that I was passionate about anything since my PhD. They created this pathway for a diagnosis. So for those whose parents who wanted their children to go forward for assessment for autism or
Mm-hmm.
ADHD, they had to do an evidence-based parenting program.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I was one of the team that was delivering programs. And obviously, with my experience of going through things with my son and everything I learned, and I'd go on any course I could find and do any kind of training to make sure that I knew like the law and things like that when it came to children with
Mm-hmm.
neurodivergence. Then in my work with families, I was then sharing the knowledge. For me, I'm a sharer. So, like, if I know sharing's caring, so I'm like, if I know this stuff, then I want
Mm-hmm.
you to know this stuff because if that's going to help you get your children's rights met, then that's what I did, and like my
Yeah,
bosses.
it's like being a voice for other parents out there who are lost and stuck and don't
Yeah,
know how to find that kind of,
yeah,
information and how to speak for themselves, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So yeah, for me, it was always teaching parents about, how to get education, healthcare plans, and things like that, so that they can help their children.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like your experience in life, growing up and the way you learn differently and all of the things that you studied and your children has all had a huge impact on how, you interact with your clients and how you show up for people in the world. And that's huge.
Yeah, I think. Well, for me, it's always about. I don't get why people like hoard knowledge.
Yeah.
And but I think that's because that's related to power, isn't it? And
Yeah.
if you can control knowledge, then you've got power.
Yeah. Exactly. You do a little bit of work in the like trauma recovery and emotional healing in your practice. Can you talk about breath work?
So I trained to become a breathwork coach a couple of years ago, and like through my journey of training to be a counsellor, what I recognised was that I had a lot of counselling, and my therapist, she was great, and I had a certain level of healing with that, with the talking therapy. But what I realised was that it just wasn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
So that cognitively, yeah, I could rationalize and see, and it changed my views on things and my relationship to myself. But there was still something in my body. I was still holding it. So when you're living with chronic anxiety and panic, you want to do anything you can to try and lessen that. So I
Mm-hmm.
come across that like in the early hours of the morning, like, because you keep on having panic attacks. So, I ended up coming across a few breaths, learning them, and, they help me.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of sparked my interest in breath work. And then, like I said, with the counselling and realising, so I saw this qualification that you could do in it. I'd always wanted to just see, and it was a two-pronged thing. So it was for me, but it was also, if
Mm-hmm.
it is good, then it's good to share with clients.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and I absolutely loved it, and it was life-changing.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed results like literally within about 3 days of like daily practice. I could start feeling how my nervous system just was like, just felt it
Mm-hmm.
like calming, just
Yeah.
like things didn't bother me as much. And I was like, oh, wow. And yeah, so and doing that daily practice, and then obviously the more you practice, the more
Mm-hmm.
benefits you get from it. So further down the line, and you're just like, wow, I just feel like a new person. Like, is this how like people feel? Like, is this what it's like to be a person?
Yeah, that's
Um,
awesome.
yeah. So for me, I'm not a religious person, but I do become very evangelical about things that like I find that I think are awesome, and I just think
Mm-hmm.
everybody else needs to know about it, and they need to know right now. So
Yeah.
I become very like, yeah, very excited, very excitable, and then I'm like going into work and like wanting to teach like my work colleagues like, you got to do this, it's amazing.
Exactly. Can you explain maybe one breath technique that my
Oh yeah,
audience could use? Just something to
yeah.
get you out of that like real
Oh yeah.
heightened state?
Yeah. So, like, one of my favorite breaths is a really simple one. It's known as a straw breath, and I think one of the wonderful things about breath work, or like somatic work in general, is that like our body has its own wisdom. Our body knows what
Yeah.
it needs. It's just that we're taught to not be connected to our body
Yeah.
in our cultures. So, because of that, we kind of lose the wisdom of our body. And this is what I love about the straw breath is a breath that we all do at times of stress, but we're not aware of it. So it's just a simple breath. So you just inhale as you normally would, and then on the exhale, you exhale out through pursed lips. So almost like you are blowing through a straw,
Mm-hmm.
hence why it's called straw breath, or you could even with bubbles. And actually, I do use bubbles with my clients. I
Oh,
always go
okay.
around and I have bubbles in my bag. And
Awesome.
it's one of yeah, it's one of the first breaths I teach my clients is the
Yeah.
straw breath, and I
Plus,
teach it with
plus you
bubbles.
look like you're like the most fun therapist.
Yeah, and I'm
Pop
like,
out some
and yeah,
bubbles.
yeah, and yeah, you could get to take them, you could keep them in your bag,
Yeah.
and you could just get them out. Like other
Yeah.
people vape, why can't you blow bubbles? You know?
Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
it's like pretend like you're blowing through a straw on the
yeah,
exhale.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, just
We're gonna try it.
yeah.
So
So
nice deep
just
breath.
inhale and
It's very intentional. It's very
yeah,
intentional.
and just
Yeah.
do that a few times.
And this is like a daily practice.
Yeah, you can do it anytime. Like I say to my
Uh-huh.
clients, the straw breath is really good for down regulation. So at the times when we're feeling really anxious, because we're inhaling as usual, but we're exhaling, and it's about the extension of the exhale. So we want to
Uh-huh.
make that exhale as long as we can. So I mean, for some people they like to count. If you do, try and make it at least double. The exhale is double the length of the inhale.
Uh-huh.
Um, and what that does is that brings in so when we're activated, we're in our sympathetic nervous system. But when
Yeah.
we exhale like that, we are bringing in our parasympathetic nervous system. So
Uh-huh.
it's also known as the vagal brake. So it sort of slows everything down, slows down our breathing, slows down our heart rate. What it does is it turns off the amygdala in the brain. So that's the smoke alarm that tells us that there is either real or perceived danger. So it's like, which then sets off that chemical reaction of
Yeah.
adrenaline and cortisol. So by practicing that breath, we are, resetting the nervous system.
Uh-huh.
Um, and the thing about it is, I like to share with my clients is just practice it at random times. Don't just wait until like you're like really anxious and like, oh God, what's
Uh-huh.
that breath again? Because you're not going to remember it at that point when
Yeah.
you really need it. You're like, oh right,
Yeah.
how do I calm down? What did she say? So I always say just practice it every day. Like if you're doing the washing up, just do
Uh-huh.
a few straw breaths.
Yeah.
Just having a walk, just do a few straw breaths
Yeah.
just you're walking,
It's like
wherever you are.
repatterning, right? It's like getting
Yeah.
that ingrained in your
Yeah.
mind. Yeah. Yeah.
So we can't call upon these resources if we don't practice them, because then if we're like literally only practicing them at the time that we like really need them, we're not going to be able to
Yeah.
access them.
No.
So yeah, just like practice these things when you don't need them, and then
Uh-huh.
they will be there because that pattern, like you said, that pattern recognition is there. So
Yeah.
you're like, oh yeah,
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. I'm going to practice that too myself. It feels good. It feels,
yeah.
relaxing, calming. So that's awesome. What other kind of strategies do you find are really effective when you're working with, people with trauma and past, possibly abuse, that type of thing?
As a trained trauma therapist, I follow the three-phase model of trauma treatment. So it's that safety and stabilization, and then it's the what we call the remembrance period. So that's where we do the memory reprocessing,
Uh-huh.
and then the final stage is called post-traumatic growth period. So that I suppose is the integration of everything. So,
Right.
really early on, like my priority is always about my client's safety
Yeah.
and making sure they're safe. And I think that's where, I mentioned earlier about my first
Uh-huh.
experience with a counsellor and how I was really unsafe.
Yeah.
And I left their office, and how that brought about, like
Yeah.
then it ended up being the worst 10 years of my life.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I'm so conscious of that
Yeah.
I'm always making sure, like, if my clients are like, maybe they want to tell me something and they start talking, then, I will. Like, if they're getting too activated, I will like, let's stop. Let's
Uh-huh.
start do body-based practice. So that
Yeah.
it could be like using straw breath or belly breathing. So, or one of my favorites is hand on the heart. I love it. It's
Uh-huh.
just like placing your hand on your heart and just allowing yourself to just be in the present and becoming aware of your breath, and then feeling the breath under your hand
Uh-huh.
and
It's
feeling.
it's bringing your two parts together. A lot of people, when they're speaking, and talk therapy is great. It's
Yeah,
great, and I've done a
yeah,
lot of it, but I understand what you're saying is and there can be triggering things with talk therapy, and we are so disconnected as children of dysfunction and
Mm,
trauma. You're so disconnected with your body. And
mm.
so
Yeah,
just those
absolutely.
simple acts, right, can really
Yeah,
bring
100%.
full
And
spectrum healing.
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
just about, and it's about finding out what works for the client, because everybody's different. We
Mm-hmm.
can't you can't treat everybody like they're the same and think, oh, these technique. I experiment, because for some people, like especially for really really traumatized people, actually breath work doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So because it's too activating, so they become too self-conscious about breathing, then it brings about panic. So you can't even start with breath work with some people because of the trauma. So you have
Mm-hmm.
to start with, um, more gentle stuff, like maybe touch, even like um, getting them to find things like stroke, this havening, stroking, and that real, because that promotes the production of oxytocin as well. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of getting them, to find what works for them.
Mm-hmm.
I also am an EFT practitioner, emotional freedom techniques,
Mm-hmm.
tapping.
Yeah.
So that I find that works really well with a lot of clients as well.
Mm-hmm.
Tapping, and it can bring down regulation really quite quickly in quite a short space of
Yeah.
time. So that's something that a lot of clients really
Mm-hmm.
like. I like to give a choice, so I teach them a lot of different techniques. So then they've got a choice. It's not like, oh, they've just got the one thing.
Yeah.
Like say, some people, when they're so activated, they can't access breath work, but they can access the tapping. So they then can maybe to go to a round of tapping, and then maybe they might then be able to access some breath work.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's really great advice. Yeah. What would you say is probably been one of the most impactful experiences for you?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would say it was definitely my counselling training. I think for me, the reason why it was so impactful, because it was the group. So I've always had a real difficulty with vulnerability, and opening up and sharing with people, because it wasn't something that was ever encouraged growing up. Nobody cared how you felt. Nobody wanted to see it. Nobody wanted to hear it, because it would just produce more like anger. I wasn't allowed to be in touch with my feelings. And then, through my life, nobody ever cared enough to want to hear what I had to say.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's my truth. Other people might have something else to say about that. But yeah, so it was a group within, my counselling training. It was the most amazing experience, training to be a therapist, and it's like no other experience that you ever have, because you have to literally go through everything. I call it emotional archaeology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you think you hit one layer and you think, oh, that's it now, I'm done. You're like, oh no, you're like, oh no, there's more. And you just like, there's layer and
Yeah.
layer and layer, and you're like, oh God, am I even at the center of the earth yet?
Yeah.
It like that. But the people that I trained with, they were just the most amazing group of people, just so empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a long time to be able to trust them, because hey, trust issues and
Yeah.
growing up in a dysfunctional family. But I was able to. And I went through the whole gamut of emotions, and opening up and saying things. I would feel, the shame afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
the vulnerability shame would hit me. So yeah, it was that learning that I could be vulnerable with them,
Mm-hmm.
and that wouldn't repel them.
Connection is so powerful, especially if you're used to hiding everything and all of your stuff inside. And when you find that community that you can open up to, or that you just have this connection with, you realize that it'll open up your world, right? It makes all the difference when you have a therapist who really understands and has a
Yeah.
background in this. So they have like just a different level of understanding and insight into how to help
Yeah,
people.
yeah, absolutely. Like for me, like trauma and domestic abuse are like my interests. I'm very, I read a lot, I study a lot in the area, but I also have the lived experience as well. So I think it's the both coming together. So yeah, I've got the theoretical knowledge, and that's helped me kind of understand things and that dynamics and what might be going on. It's an absolute privilege, though, to be able to sit there with somebody and be trusted with their story. I mean, but I've been working in my local women's refuge with survivors for the last 2 years, and these women, they are incredible. They really
It's
are.
beautiful to see people start to open up and realize their worth and all of this stuff. Yeah.
The change that you
Yeah.
see from like the
Yeah.
first session, and as you go through, and how much their lives changed by the end of it, and how they are no longer living in that shame, and they're able to see that it wasn't their fault, and that they didn't I made a bad choice, or I'm really bad at picking up men, and you're like, no, seeing that change over time, and then how they're then able to be looking forward to the future, and building their life post the refuge. And it's just amazing.
Do you work remotely with people?
Yes,
You
I
do?
do
Okay.
a lot in my
Awesome.
private practice.
Yeah.
I work mostly remotely with people. I think because of my niche is more like it chose me rather than me choosing it, kind of thing. And I think that's the way it
Exactly.
happens sometimes.
Yeah.
I think being a late identified autistic myself, the majority of the people that come to me are also late identified autistic, adults exploring their autistic identities and their experiences and their trauma.
Yeah. And where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
On my website. So that's where most people find me. I'm in the UK. I'm on the counselling directory and Psychology Today, and I'm also on the neurodivergent practitioners directory. So that's where most of my clients find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a guest. And this was really insightful into a couple different topics, and I'm really glad we got a chance to discuss everything.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on another episode of Becoming Sound. If this episode resonated with you in some way, please share it with someone you care about. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It helps to get this information out to more people who may need it. If you have a sec, I would love a follow on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. While you're there, hit the 5-star rating and give me a review. When you're scrolling, follow me on my social platforms, and I would love to hear your comments and feedback. Have a fabulous day, lots of love and gratitude from me. Please note, the views, information, and opinions expressed during the Becoming Sound podcast series are solely those of the individuals involved. The content of this podcast is to educate, inform, and for entertainment purposes only. This podcast series and the content presented does not constitute for medical or other professional advice or services. If you are in crisis or in need of help, please contact your medical or professional provider.